cobalt. Cobalt is the mineral used in the lithium-ion batteries that power many of our smart devices. And while we spend time complaining about how those batteries don't last long enough, children in the Congo as young as 7 years old are working in dangerous conditions to mine that cobalt for companies that we know and love, like Apple, Samsung, Sony, and Microsoft. Now, this is according to a report released today by Amnesty International and African Resources Watch. Children, including orphans and adults in the Congo, are working 12-hour days to mine the cobalt used in smartphones, computers, and cars. The report also says that these companies are not doing just the very basic checks to ensure that cobalt mined by child laborers has not been used in their products. And these are artisanal mines, and this is the first report on the conditions there and how this cobalt gets into the supply chain. Allison, you said you had a strong opinion. What do you think about this story?
Well, there's a couple of different angles. It's not that this isn't a serious story, but I get a little weary of how they take the big tech names and put them out there. I've got a camera that's not made by a big, highly known manufacturer, but it's got a lithium-ion battery in it, but their name wasn't out there, right? It's lithium-ion batteries that are made with cobalt. So, you know, you put Apple and the other big companies on top, and then it turns it into a story where you're like, oh, Apple should be doing more. So I'm not saying it isn't important and that we shouldn't talk about it, but that was just, I wanted to level set that lithium-ion batteries are all over your house, right? The other thing is, I was reading the specific answer that Apple gave to the allegations, and they said some really, really cool things that they're doing in particular, and in taking this seriously. They said that any supplier found hiring underage workers must, 1, fund the worker's safe return home, 2, fully finance a worker's education at a school chosen by the worker and his or her family, 3, continue to pay the worker's wages, and 4, offer the worker a job when he or she reaches the legal age. I thought that was really, really interesting that they're doing those specific things, but that they have to catch the supplier doing it for that to work. The other thing they said in there was that in the last 5 years, and I'm paraphrasing this a little bit because it was pretty long, Apple worked to implement an industry-wide standard, drove compliance with the conflict-free resourcing program or equivalent third-party audit programs, expanded traceability to the mine site. As of November 2015, over 95% of our reported smelters are compliant or participating in third-party audit, verifying their conflict-free sourcing practices. So, I mean, it didn't sound like pablum to me. It didn't sound like, oh, yeah, we check that. It sounded like they really are doing these audits and that they are finding some situations, and that they said it's at 95%, but that isn't enough. It needs to be 100%.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you that that there's many companies involved in this. But I think the way that change happens is when someone calls out these big companies and says, hey, you know, are you doing everything you can?
So it's 16 multinational companies that were listed specifically as customers of, is it High-U Cobalt? One of the two. The other is what was it? It's the CDM. And basically, so 16 multinational companies. And I was reading kind of the TechCrunch kind of run through on this. Some of the companies have admitted the connection. And essentially how this is connected, right, is that these two companies buy cobalt in those areas. That cobalt makes it to battery component makers, essentially, and then those battery components end up in all of the devices that we use. And so that's kind of the level of difficulty here between the 16 multinational companies. Some admitted the connection, some said, you know, kind of hedged their bets, said they didn't know for certain. Some denied association, though they're still listed directly in the documentation as customers. Yeah, it's such a complicated thing, especially
problem. Right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. It probably is.
Right,
and they work with someone who works with them.
Yeah, and so it's also a problem with us kind of just wanting to turn the other way and saying like, oh, you know, it's fine.
Yeah, that's I think the bigger challenge and where it's difficult for me when I think of stories like this, because I mean, you take the three of us, we have built a career, you know, and TWiT, like we've built a career around technology, and there is a greater level to kind of respect when it comes to all this kind of stuff, but it's so easy to forget it because it seems so far removed from the fact that we carry a phone in our pocket and we don't know necessarily what has sourced all of those components. But then you read something like this and my immediate reaction is, okay, well, I want to throw my phone away because I feel like just by having the phone with a lithium-ion battery in it, I support this, which ethically, I do not support this. But yet it's so complicated because in the United States, as just one example, we are surrounded by this stuff. How do you remove it from your life?
Right. And I get what you're saying too, Allison. Like, we don't want, everybody remembers Mike Daisy and when he went in and, said exaggerated the working conditions in order to tell a compelling story. And it was unfortunate because there was a story to be told, but he exaggerated it a lot, and his facts weren't correct. And so, you don't want to be knee jerk in this either.
Back to Jason's point, I like the. Did you see the Saturday Night Live skit quite a few years ago where it was supposedly a wired. A couple of tech reporters, and then they had people from the company that makes the iPhones talking to them about their working conditions versus, is it too light? Is this too light? Did we make it wrong? And they're talking about standing in line for 6 months to get food and
I know.
Think about complaining about the battery pack on the iPhone battery. Like, okay, never mind.
Right. Like the complaints that we have about our technology versus, man, it could, it could be so much worse. And in fact, is so much worse in other parts of the world directly related to that technology that you're carrying around. It's such a catch-22.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really important to be reminded. One of the specifics of the Amnesty International report, which I thought was interesting when you're talking about conflict materials, those are tin, tungsten, tantalum, and gold. And the Dodd-Frank Act requires companies to disclose whether their supply chains involve those conflict materials, but cobalt isn't on the list. And I'm not sure why not, but it's not on the list, so it's not considered a conflict material. But clearly it is. I mean, there's children mining it. They have to wash it, and there's a lot. It's dangerous conditions. It's a material you don't want children
direct contact with.
Yeah, so it's important to think about this stuff, I think.
Mm-hmm. We were just talking about the ages of our own children. I mean, Megan, you've got a child who's 12.
Yeah.
Just trying to picture working in a mine in those kind of conditions. It's just horrible.
Can't even imagine that.
So, yeah,
so
and talking about them.
Apple and Google and them on top to get attention, it's okay.
Right. Yeah, and that's how things change, right?
Sure. Yeah. Good point.